I never put much stock in rumors. Men who do end up chasing shadows, seeing threats where there ain't any, driving themselves half-mad over things that probably ain't true. But this wasn't some neighborhood gossip, the kind of talk that spreads over backyard fences and dies out by morning. This came from Charlie, my oldest friend, a man who never spoke unless he had something worth saying. And the way he said it, the way he leaned in close, voice low like he was handing me a loaded gun, made my stomach turn before the words even hit the air. "You need to keep an eye on your wife," he muttered, swirling the whiskey in his glass like it carried the weight of something he didn't want to say out loud. I froze, my grip tightening around my own drink. The noise of Murphy's, the clinking glasses, the dull hum of conversation, the faint crackle of the jukebox in the corner, faded into the background. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, heavy and slow, like a warning drum. Charlie wasn't the type to stir up trouble. He wasn't the kind of guy who talked behind people's backs just to entertain himself. If he was saying this, it was because he'd seen something, heard something. I could have asked him right then and there, could have demanded details, made him spell out for me. But I didn't, because deep down, I already knew. For months, something had been off. It wasn't one big, obvious thing, but 100 little ones, piling up like bricks until I was standing under the weight of a house I didn't even realize had been built around me. Vanessa had always been warm, always had this way of making a room feel brighter just by being in it. But lately, there was a distance to her, a carefulness, like she was thinking through every word before she said it, picking the safest ones, the ones that wouldn't make me look too closely. She'd been on her phone more, smiling at it sometimes, other times turning it over when I walked into the room, like she didn't want me seeing something that might make me ask questions. And then there was the music. A few months back, she'd suddenly decided she wanted to learn piano. So that was a lifelong regret of hers, that she wished she'd taken lessons as a kid. I thought it was a little strange at the time. Vanessa had never once mentioned an interest in playing before, but I didn't question it. If she wanted to learn, why not? So I paid for a private instructor, some up-and-coming musician she found online. Name of Adrian. Young. Handsome. The kind of guy who looked like he spent more time styling his hair than working a real job. When I met him, he was wearing a button-down shirt that fit just a little too well, like he wanted people to notice the way it clung to him. His handshake was weak, just the tips of his fingers, like he was afraid of breaking a nail. Men like that disgust me. No real substance, no real strength. Just a smooth smile and soft hands, made for touching things that don't belong to them. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just jealous. What husband wouldn't feel a little twinge of something when his wife starts spending hours alone with some pretty boy musician, sitting close together on the piano bench, his hand guiding hers over the keys, his voice soft in her ear as he corrected her mistakes. It was innocent, I told myself. Professional. But it wasn't, was it? Because Charlie wouldn't have said anything if it was. I didn't confront Vanessa that night. Didn't ask her where she'd been, what she'd been doing, who she'd been doing it with. Instead, I went home, walked through the front door like nothing had changed, even though everything had. The house smelled like vanilla candles, the one she always lit in the evenings. The living room was tidy, the coffee table wiped clean, a throw blanket folded neatly over the back of the couch. A picture-perfect home, like the kind you see in magazines. The kind where nothing is supposed to be wrong. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she washed dishes, her back to me. I stood there for a long time, just watching her. Hating myself for not seeing it sooner. Hating the fact that I already knew how this was going to end. I wanted to grab a chair and smash it against the wall. I wanted to slam my fist through the plaster, rip apart the life we'd built with my bare hands. Instead, I swallowed it all down, let it sit like acid in my gut, and walked upstairs without saying a word. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even try. I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the rage settle into my bones. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Morning came slow. Or maybe it was just me. I spent the whole night in bed, staring at the ceiling, body rigid, jaw clenched so hard it felt like my teeth might crack. I didn't move. Didn't close my eyes. Didn't even turn my head to look at Vanessa sleeping beside me. Her breathing soft, steady, peaceful, like she didn't have a single worry in the goddamn world. Like she wasn't betraying me. I wanted to wake her up, shake her until those sleepy, innocent eyes of hers snapped open and she saw what I saw. Me, her husband, the man she stood in front of God and promised to love, looking at her like she was the worst mistake I ever made. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed proof. Charlie wouldn't have warned me if there wasn't something to warn me about. He wasn't one to speak without reason. But I wasn't about to go throwing accusations without evidence. Because the moment I did, if I was wrong, if there was some explanation, everything would crack. I wasn't sure if it would crack in my favor, or if I'd be the one left standing in the rubble. So I got up, silent as a ghost. I showered, got dressed, went through the motions like it was any other day, like I wasn't walking around with a storm building under my skin. Vanessa stirred in bed, but didn't wake. Good. I needed her to stay asleep a little longer. I needed time. The first thing I did was check her phone. Now, I ain't proud of that. Never been the kind of man who spies on his wife. Never needed to be. But standing there in our dimly lit bedroom, with the weight of Charlie's warning pressing down on my shoulders, I told myself that privacy was a privilege you earned through honesty. And if she was lying to me, if she was sneaking around, then I wasn't breaking any trust by checking. I was confirming that there was no trust left to break. The phone was on her nightstand, plugged in, face down. A little too careful, like she didn't want to risk a notification popping up where I could see it. I picked it up, heart hammering. But it was locked. Not just locked, changed. The password was different. A month ago, it had been our anniversary date. Easy. Something we both use for most things. But now I was staring at a blank passcode screen, knowing damn well she didn't change it for security reasons. She changed it to keep me out. My stomach twisted, that sick, ugly kind of twist that feels like a knife turning in your gut. She was hiding something. She was hiding him. I set the phone back down exactly how I found it, careful not to make a sound. If she woke up and caught me checking, I wouldn't be able to play it off. The rage boiling inside me would be too obvious. I'd lose control before I had what I needed. So I walked out of the bedroom, downstairs, straight to the kitchen, where the smell of old coffee lingered in the air, stale and bitter. I poured a fresh cup, sat at the table, and stared at the steam curling into the morning light. I needed to think. I needed a plan. It wasn't long before I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Light, carefree. She had no idea that today wasn't like all the others. Morning, she said, her voice warm, casual, like she wasn't lying to my face every single day. I didn't answer right away, just kept my eyes on my coffee, watching the ripples shift as I tapped the side of the mug with my thumb. After a few seconds, she hesitated. You okay? I finally looked at her. She was standing in the doorway, wrapped in that soft blue robe she loved, her hair still messy from sleep. She looked the same as always, like the woman I married, the woman I built a life with. But she wasn't. Not anymore. I forced a tight-lipped smile. Didn't sleep much. She frowned, walking over, running a hand over my shoulder like she actually cared. You've been so tense lately. Tense. That was one word for it. Just a lot on my mind, I muttered. She pressed a kiss to my temple, lingering just a little too long. I knew what she was doing. Playing the role of the good wife, affectionate, doting. I used to believe in that act. Used to love the way she smelled in the morning, the way her lips felt warm against my skin. Now it made me sick. I forced myself to sit still until she pulled away, until she turned toward the fridge, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. I should have said something then. Should have looked her dead in the eye and told her I knew. But I didn't, because I wasn't done playing, either. That afternoon, I called Charlie. Did you see them together? I asked. No greeting. No small talk. I didn't have the patience for it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then a heavy sigh. Not with my own eyes, no. But I know a guy who did. My stomach clenched. Who? Mark. Runs security at the Blue Orchid. He saw them last weekend. Her and that musician of hers. So they were in one of the private booths, real cozy. I knew the place. It was a jazz lounge downtown. Low lights, expensive drinks, couples tucked away in velvet booths where no one could see what their hands were doing under the table. Vanessa had told me she was out with friends that night. I gripped the phone so tight, I thought it might snap. Charlie kept talking, his voice edged with caution. I wouldn't have brought this to you if I wasn't sure, man. I know what this means. Yeah, I knew what it meant, too. It meant my wife, the woman I built my goddamn life around, was sneaking off with another man. Lying to me. Playing house with some slick-haired musician who thought he could touch what was mine and walk away without consequences. That wasn't happening. Not a chance in hell. Thanks, Charlie, I said, voice tight. I'll take it from here. I hung up before he could say anything else. Then I sat there, gripping my phone, heart pounding in my ears, staring at the table like I could see the whole damn thing playing out in front of me. Vanessa's fingers resting on Adrian's arm, her lips curving into that soft little smile she used to save just for me. I felt something snap. This wasn't just about finding proof anymore. This was about payback. I spent the rest of the day moving like a man with a gun pressed to his back. Every step I took, every breath I let out, it all felt controlled, restrained, like if I let go even for a second, I'd explode and take everything down with me. Vanessa moved around the house like nothing was wrong, humming while she folded laundry, scrolling through her phone with that little smile on her lips. That same goddamn smile she probably gave him. It made my stomach churn. I wanted to grab her phone out of her hands, smash it against the wall, and demand the truth right there, but I didn't. Not yet. A man who wants to win a fight doesn't throw his first punch blind. He waits. He watches. And when the time is right, he hits hard enough that the other guy doesn't get back up. That's what I was going to do. By the time evening rolled around, Vanessa was dressed to go out. Nothing flashy, just jeans, a sweater, hair done in that effortless way that took her longer than she'd ever admit. Casual, like she wasn't going anywhere important. Except I knew better. Heading somewhere, I asked, keeping my voice even. She didn't hesitate. Emma invited me over for a girls' night. Liar. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my drink, pretending I wasn't picturing wrapping my hands around that musician's throat. When will you be back? Not late, she said. Just a couple of drinks, maybe a movie. A perfect little lie, delivered without a single crack. She'd gotten good at it. Too good. I let my eyes linger on her a second longer, waiting to see if she'd squirm under my stare. She didn't. That was the worst part. She kissed my cheek before walking out the door, like she wasn't walking straight into another man's arms. As soon as the door shut behind her, I grabbed my keys. I parked a block away from the Blue Orchid. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting a dull yellow glow over the sidewalk, making the whole place feel even more like a movie set for bad decisions. I wasn't stupid enough to walk right in. Not yet. Instead, I leaned against my truck, lit a cigarette, and waited. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, she walked right past my damn truck without even noticing. Not alone. Adrian was with her, wearing some slim-cut suit that looked like he spent half his paycheck on it. His hand hovered near her lower back, just close enough to make my blood boil. I should have dragged him into the street right then and there. Should have grabbed him by that expensive collar and put his pretty boy face through my windshield. But I didn't, because Vanessa wasn't just cheating. She was comfortable. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't some drunken fling she regretted the next morning. This was a habit, a routine, and if she thought she could walk into our home, kiss me goodnight, and keep doing it behind my back, then she was in for a hell of a wake-up call. I let them go inside, gave them a few minutes. Then I walked in after them. The Blue Orchid was dimly lit, all warm tones and slow jazz. The kind of place where people sipped overpriced cocktails and pretended they weren't doing things they'd regret the next morning. I spotted them in the back, tucked into a booth away from prying eyes. His arm was resting on the back of the seat, dangerously close to her shoulders. She was leaning in, laughing, touching his wrist. Not a care in the goddamn world. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. I could have marched right over. Could have grabbed her by the arm, yanked her out of that booth, and let the whole damn room know exactly what kind of woman she was. But that would have been easy. Too easy. And she didn't deserve easy. No. If she wanted to lie, I was going to let her. For now. I turned and walked out, my pulse a drumbeat in my ears, my hands itching for a better plan. I wasn't going to just catch her. I was going to make sure she'd never forget what happened next. I drove home slow, not because I needed time to think. I already knew exactly what I was going to do, but because if I went any faster, I might wrap the truck around a telephone pole just trying to get the rage out of my system. Vanessa. Vanessa, who swore she loved me, who promised to be faithful, who stood in front of our friends, our families, and God himself, and said she'd never betray me. Vanessa, who was laughing over some candlelit table with another man while I sat alone in the home I built for her. If I let myself dwell on it too long, I'd lose control. And that wasn't the plan. The plan was to wait. The plan was to let her think she'd gotten away with it. Because if she thought I was clueless, she wouldn't be careful. And if she wasn't careful, I'd get every ounce of proof I needed. And when I finally did confront her, she wouldn't have a single excuse left to hide behind. I spent the next few days playing dumb. Didn't act any different. Didn't stare too long. Didn't change my tone when I spoke to her. I let her kiss me in the morning before she left for work. Let her sit beside me on the couch in the evenings like she wasn't lying through her teeth every time she said, "I love you." But while I played my role, I was setting the stage for hers. First, I dug through her phone records. She didn't realize I had access to them. She thought changing her passcode was enough to keep her secrets locked away, but she forgot one thing. She was still on my plan. And there it was. Adrian's number. Over and over again, late-night calls, text exchanges that lasted for hours. Some were short, just a few minutes, but others stretched past midnight, long after I was asleep upstairs. How many of those nights had I kissed her goodnight while she lay next to me, texting him under the covers? I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles popped. Not yet. I wasn't done. The next step was the car. See, Vanessa wasn't the most tech-savvy woman in the world. She could send an email, post a picture on Instagram, but when it came to anything beyond that, she was about as clueless as they come, which meant she had no idea that the car's GPS stored every location she visited. I pulled it up one evening while she was in the shower, scrolling through the past few weeks. Her work, the grocery store, the gym, all normal. But then, the Blue Orchid, an apartment complex across town. My pulse ticked up. She'd been there 4 times in the last month. Always in the evening, always for at least 2 hours. She never told me she was visiting anyone. Never mentioned a friend who lived there. There was only one reason she'd be going to some random apartment this often. I had everything I needed, but I wasn't finished. No, if I was going to end this, I was going to end it on my terms. The final step was the camera. Now, before anyone gets the wrong idea, I didn't go sticking one in our bedroom or planting a wire in her purse. I didn't need to. I just set up a motion-activated security camera in the garage. Vanessa didn't notice when she left for work the next morning. She didn't even glance at it. And when she came home that night, pulling into the garage with the same ease she always did, she had no idea that I'd get an alert on my phone the second she walked inside. For 3 days, I watched. I watched her come home at normal hours. I watched her leave for work in the mornings. I watched her move around like nothing was different. And then, Friday night, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, but not really watching when my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Garage. I pulled up the feed, heart pounding. Vanessa, standing next to her car. On the phone. Her head was down, her voice muffled, but the way she was talking, the way she smiled, tucked her hair behind her ear, made my blood go ice cold. And then I saw her lips move. 2 words. I love you. It felt like my lungs collapsed. I sat there, gripping my phone, watching her lean against the car, still talking, still smiling. My wife, telling another man she loved him while I sat in the next room. It took everything in me not to throw my phone across the room. I forced myself to breathe. Not yet. Not yet. The next morning, I put my plan in motion. I made coffee like always. Ate breakfast like always. Kissed her cheek when she walked past me in the kitchen, like always. She had no idea what was coming. Vanessa was going to meet Adrian that night. I knew it. I saw it in the way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The way she smiled at something before locking the screen and setting it face down on the table. She thought she was being clever. She thought I was an idiot. So I gave her space. Let her think I was busy, distracted. And when she left the house that night, thinking I was none the wiser, I followed. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me. Watched as she drove across town, right to that same apartment complex I'd seen on the GPS records. I parked down the street, heart thudding in my chest, and waited. And then, there he was. Adrian, walking out of the apartment, all casual confidence, his stupid slicked-back hair gleaming under the streetlights. Vanessa stepped out of the car, and he pulled her into a hug. Not just a hug. His hand slid down her back, resting way too low. And she laughed. She let him. She leaned into him like she belonged there. Something inside me snapped. I didn't think. I just moved. I was out of the truck, walking toward them before I even realized what I was doing. And when Adrian finally noticed me, when his face went pale and his hands dropped away from my wife, that's when the real fun began. I could see the exact moment Adrian realized he was in trouble. His body stiffened, his arms dropped, and his whole demeanor shifted from smooth and confident to stiff and uncertain. His gaze darted between Vanessa and me like he was calculating whether he could talk his way out of this or if he needed to run. Vanessa turned around slowly, her body language changing as soon as she saw me. Shock, guilt, panic. She wasn't a great actress, but she tried. Her lips parted, ready to spew some excuse, but I didn't give her the chance. I kept walking, step by step, slow, controlled. I wanted him to feel it, the weight of my presence, the way the air got heavier, the way he suddenly looked so much smaller despite all his bullshit bravado. By the time I reached them, Adrian took a step back. Smart move. Too bad it wouldn't help him. For a second, nobody said anything. Vanessa stood frozen, her eyes darting between me and him like she couldn't decide which one of us she should be more afraid of. I took my time, let the silence stretch out, let the tension settle thick in the air. Then finally I spoke. Go on, Vanessa, I said, my voice even. Too even. You were about to say something. Let's hear it. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. And there it was, that slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her voice. The fear, the realization that she wasn't walking away from this unscathed. I waited, gave her another second. She had nothing. Adrian took another step back, but I snapped my gaze to him so fast he flinched. What about you? I asked, tilting my head. You got something to say? He hesitated, blinked, opened his mouth, and then closed it again. Coward. The silence stretched longer. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept my expression calm, controlled. I wasn't going to hit him yet. Not here. Not now. No, this moment was about making them both feel it, making them stand there, exposed, knowing there was no escape, making them understand that I wasn't just some clueless husband who got played. I was the executioner standing over them with an axe. I was going to make them sweat before I swung. I let out a slow, humorless chuckle. You know, I said, shaking my head, I actually wanted to believe I was imagining things, that I was just being paranoid. But no, you two just had to make it easy for me, didn't you? Vanessa's mouth opened again, but I didn't let her speak. Save it. I snapped, my voice like ice. I don't want to hear whatever pathetic excuse you're about to spit out. Her face twisted. It's not what it looks like. I laughed. Actually laughed. A deep, dark sound that didn't belong to the man I used to be. Not what it looks like, I echoed, taking a step closer. You sure about that? Because it looks like my wife, the woman I swore my life to, is sneaking around with some low-rent musician who couldn't fight his way out of paper bag. Adrian stiffened at that, but he didn't move. Smart. You should go, Vanessa whispered to him, barely audible. The nerve. She was actually trying to protect him. Not herself. Not our marriage. Him. That was the moment something inside me twisted into something darker. You think he's walking away from this? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Adrian paled. Look, man, Shut up. I interrupted, eyes locking onto his. He shut up. Good. I took another step forward, forcing him back toward the car. My movements were slow, deliberate, the way a wolf might approach a wounded deer. You had a choice, Adrian. I murmured, my voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. You knew she was married. You knew what you were doing. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Vanessa reached out and grabbed my arm. Please. I yanked away so fast she stumbled. Don't touch me. I snapped. For a split second, the mask slipped. Her face crumpled. Not in guilt, not in remorse, but in fear. She knew. She finally knew. I wasn't going to just walk away from this. I wasn't going to let them pretend like none of this happened. I turned back to Adrian, who looked like he was seconds away from bolting. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, tilting my head. "You're going to disappear. You're going to forget my wife ever existed. And if I ever see you again, if I even hear your name, I'll make sure you regret ever meeting her." He hesitated. I didn't. I took another step closer, and he practically tripped over himself trying to back up. "You did," I said, "and you're done. Understand?" His face was pale. He nodded. "Say it," I demanded. He swallowed. I understand." "Good." For a moment, I considered hitting him anyway. Just one punch. Just to feel his bones crack under my knuckles. Just to let out even a fraction of the rage boiling inside me. But no, not yet, because I wasn't done with her. Adrian scrambled away like a kicked dog, nearly tripping over the curb in his rush to get to his car. I didn't watch him leave. I turned back to Vanessa instead. She was shaking, arms crossed over her stomach, as if she could hold herself together. And she was looking at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Good, because I wasn't her husband anymore. That man? That man died the second she looked at another man the way she used to look at me. And now, she was going to see just how ugly things were about to get. Vanessa and I stood there in the cold night air, the silence between us stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on her face. She looked small, fragile even, like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing there was no way back. Good. She should be scared. I wasn't the husband she thought she could play for a fool anymore. That man, the one who kissed her goodnight without question, who believed her lies without hesitation, was dead. And I was what was left. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. I laughed. Just a breath of a sound, sharp and humorless. "Go on, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm, controlled, deadly. "Say it. Whatever bullshit excuse you've been rehearsing in your head. Let's hear it." Her hands clenched into fists. I didn't mean, "Don't," I interrupted, taking a slow step forward. "Don't you dare stand there and insult me with some pathetic lie about how you didn't mean for this to happen." Her breath hitched. How long?" I asked, voice flat. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. "Tell me the truth, Vanessa," I said, tilting my head. "Or I swear to God, whatever small chance you have of walking away from this with an ounce of dignity is gone." Her lip trembled. She looked down at the ground, as if the answers might be hiding in the cracks of the pavement. 6 months, she whispered. I let out a slow breath through my nose, nodding. 6 months. 6 months. Half a goddamn year. While I was sitting across from her at dinner, thinking we were fine. While I was working late, thinking she was home waiting for me. While I was waking up next to her, thinking she was still mine. How many times? I asked, my voice quiet. Tears welled in her eyes. Please. How many times? She flinched like I'd hit her. And maybe in some way I had. Her lip trembled. I don't know. You don't know. I repeated, nodding slowly. She dared to reach for me again, her fingers brushing against my wrist. I swear it was just. I stepped back so fast she stumbled forward, nearly falling. Her breath hitched. She wasn't crying because she was sorry. She was crying because she got caught. Because the pretty little world she built, where she could have her husband and her lover, where she could come home to my arms after being in his, where she could pretend she was still a good wife, was crumbling around her. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice low. Her shoulders shook. I never stopped loving you. I laughed. Deep, bitter, dark. Love. I echoed. That's what you call this? Love. She shook her head quickly, eyes wide. I was lonely and... Oh, don't give me that lonely bullshit, I snapped, stepping toward her again, forcing her to look me in the eye. You weren't lonely. You were greedy. You wanted more. And instead of talking to me, instead of fixing whatever was wrong, you crawled into bed with another man. She sobbed, wiping at her face, but I wasn't moved. Not this time. I had spent months, living in the same house as a woman who was lying to me every single day. I had spent countless nights wondering why she was distant, why she was suddenly so guarded with her phone, why the woman I loved felt like a stranger in her own home. And now I knew. She'd already made her choice. Now it was my turn. I turned around and started walking back to my truck. She panicked. Wait, I didn't. She caught up, grabbing at my arm like she had the right to touch me. Please, let's talk about this. I yanked my arm free. We're done talking, Vanessa. She shook her head violently. You can't just walk away. I turned on her so fast she gasped. Watch me. Her breath came fast, her eyes wide. I'll do anything, I swear, she pleaded. I'll cut him off, Vanessa. I interrupted, my voice suddenly so calm it scared even me. You think I want you now? Her lips parted. She blinked like I had just slapped her. Good. Let it sink in. You think after this, after knowing what you did, how long you did it, how easily you lied to me, I could ever look at you the same way. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because she knew. She knew she'd ruined everything. Not just our marriage. Not just my trust. But me. Whatever love I had for her. Whatever warmth. Whatever devotion. She had shattered it. Stomped on it. Spit in my face. And now she wanted to fix it? Now, she wanted to pretend like we could come back from this? No. There was no coming back. I climbed into my truck, slamming the door shut. She ran to the driver's side, pounding her fist against the window. Please. I turned the engine on. Just talk to me, she begged. Don't let this be how we end. I finally looked at her. I stared at the woman I had once built my whole world around. The woman I had loved with everything in me. The woman who had taken all of that and thrown it away like it meant nothing. And I said the last thing I would ever say to her. This isn't how we end, Vanessa. Her breath hitched. This is how you end. Then I drove away. I didn't go home. Home wasn't a place I could go back to. Not now. Instead, I drove. And drove. And drove. The highway stretched in front of me, endless and dark, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because the man I was before tonight, he didn't exist anymore. I drove for hours. The road stretched out before me, endless and dark, disappearing into the horizon like it had no intention of ever letting me turn back. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached, but I didn't loosen my hold. The anger was still boiling under my skin, a slow, steady burn that refused to go out, and the only thing keeping me from slamming my fist through the dashboard was the rhythmic hum of the tires against the pavement. I wasn't going anywhere specific. I just needed to go. Needed to put miles between me and Vanessa. Between me and that apartment complex. Between me and the goddamn wreckage of my marriage. Because that's what it was now. A wreckage. A crumpled, smoldering heap of memories and broken vows, of stolen glances and whispered I love yous that meant nothing. And there was no fixing it. No rebuilding. Nothing to salvage. She had made sure of that. By the time the sky started shifting from black to deep blue, the anger had dulled into something else. Something heavier. Something that sat low in my stomach like a weight I'd never be able to shake. I pulled into an empty gas station parking lot, killed the engine, and just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, breathing steady, mind replaying everything. Her voice. It was just, I never stopped loving you. I was lonely. Bullshit. Every word. She hadn't been lonely. She hadn't been lost or confused or whatever the hell else she was going to claim. She had made a choice. Over and over again. She had looked at me, at the life we built together, and decided it wasn't enough. And now she was scared. Not because she was sorry, not because she regretted hurting me, but because she knew what came next. She was about to lose everything. I stared out at the empty road ahead of me, the neon glow of the gas station sign flickering in the rearview mirror. I had options. I could go home, pack a bag, leave her in the dust, and never look back. I could go back there right now, throw every single one of her things into the street, let the neighbors see what kind of woman she really was. Or I could make sure she felt this the way I did. Not just as a mistake, not just as something she could cry her way out of, but as a consequence. And I knew exactly how to do it. I turned the engine back on, but I didn't drive home. Instead, I drove to the one person I knew would have my back in this. Charlie. His house was quiet when I pulled up, the porch light still on, like he'd left it burning in case I showed. I didn't bother knocking. Just walked up and rapped my knuckles against the door until I heard movement inside. A few seconds later, It swung open, and there he was. Charlie took one look at me and exhaled through his nose. Damn. I didn't say anything. He stepped aside, letting me in, and I walked straight to his kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge like it was my own house. Charlie shut the door behind me, crossed his arms, and leaned against the counter. You finally saw it for yourself. I popped the cap off the bottle, took a long drink, then nodded. Yeah. He didn't ask me to explain. Didn't press for details. He just waited, and when I finally set the bottle down, looking him dead in the eye, I said exactly what I needed to say. I'm going to ruin her. Charlie didn't blink. All right. I leaned forward, forearms braced on the counter. I want her out. I want her to leave with nothing. I want her to regret this every single goddamn day of her life. Charlie studied me for a long moment. Then he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You want my advice? I didn't, but I nodded anyway. Don't just kick her out. His voice was calm, steady. You got the upper hand here. You take your time. You make it hurt. I narrow my eyes. What do you mean? Charlie took a slow sip of his own beer. You play it smart, he said. You don't scream. You don't throw shit. You don't give her a reason to tell some sob story about how you flew off the handle. You keep your cool. You make her sweat. You make her wonder what you know and what you don't. He set his bottle down. And when she thinks she's got a way out, you close the door in her face. I considered that, rolled it around in my head, let myself picture it. Vanessa, pacing the house, wondering why I hadn't confronted her yet. Vanessa, checking her phone every few minutes, expecting me to explode at any second. Vanessa, unraveling piece by piece while I sat back and watched. And when a moment came, when she was desperate, raw, pleading, I'd ripped the rug out from under her. She didn't deserve a clean break. She deserved this. All of it. And I was going to give it to her. By the time I left Charlie's, the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. I drove home, pulled into the driveway, sat there for a moment, just watching the house. My house. Not hers. Not anymore. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee still lingering in the air. Vanessa wasn't awake yet. Good. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a mug, poured myself a cup like it was any other day, and then I sat at the table, waiting, because she had no idea what was coming. And that was the best part.